Hey guys, it's Matt from Tackle.com as well as Last Chance Bait and Tackle. Just want to thank you guys for joining our Periscope episode tonight. Tonight's Periscope is going to be going over a couple baits that I used to approach fishing in the nighttime. Obviously, tournaments are coming up, the night tournaments, and a lot of people just simply love the night bite to go fish their favorite ponds, their golf courses, some of the lakes that are open 24 hours, that kind of thing. Before I actually go into detail about a couple of these baits, I just want to give you guys a heads up. As always, it's always kind of a tough thing to find Roman-made baits. We actually got in some new Roman-mades, obviously the lipless tricks. We got them in a variety of colors. Hop on over to Tackle.com. Hit swim baits, go to hard swim baits, find the Roman-made logo, click on that, and you'll actually be able to see these baits. We got IU, we got albino, we got U.S. trout, Peter sand perch, and then the U.S. gill. So definitely cool to see these baits back in stock. These things are really, really killer baits. We're just covering a lot of water for that summertime bite. Definitely something that we can use right now. And in my personal opinion, I would actually have you guys look at the IU and the albino. These fit the bill for most situations we're going to deal with. Obviously, this can double up for a baby bass pattern, as well as this doubling up for shad. The Peter sand perch, really good little bluegill imitation. You don't have to have heavy equipment to throw these particular baits. If you go out there with a flipping stick, light swim bait stick, killer outfit for these guys. Obviously, I'm going to want to fish something in the neighborhood of 15 to 25 pound test with these things. You can fish braid to leader. You can fish straight mono, straight fluoro. That's up to you guys. Gear ratio wise, you don't want anything too high. I would stay in that realm of the 6.3 to 1 gear ratio. You have a lot of control, and you can do a lot of damage with those things. Very good baits. They're not going to last. We had negotiators in earlier today, and literally, we got them in. We didn't even put them out. We got the phone calls, and they already sold out. So right now, we do have a bunch of the lipless tricks that I think you guys might want to look at. So, like I said before, this is the nighttime bite. This is summertime. This is fun. This is when we get to go out at night. It's not super cold anymore. We can go fish our favorite ponds. We can float tube our favorite little watering holes. We can fish some night tournaments. So, as always, obviously nighttime patterns are going to be different from daytime patterns. Where they are in the daytime, we may be covering water fishing points, rock piles, ridges, creek channels, all that kind of stuff in the daytime, because we know fish retreated out to deeper water, setting up on these individual spots. But at nighttime, they can use the cloak of darkness to come up on the bank, filter through, eat baby bass, eat bluegills, eat crawdads, trout if they're still in the lakes. So you have to think differently when you think about nighttime fish. What I like to do is obviously if I'm fishing the lakes nonstop, I know my milk run, my series of spots that I can hit in the quickest amount of time. I know where I need to be at what given time, making that perfect cast according to the sun angle, shadow lines, grass edges, water different color or water clarity differences, transitions I should say. And I know where those fish are going to be, but at nighttime, a lot of times what I struggled with in fishing night tournaments or whatever was to find areas. I would always go back to my daytime spots and my fish are gone. There's some fish here, but a lot of them had left. What I like to do is I like to seek out my daytime spots and find out where in areas fish filter up the bank. And a lot of times that's your points, that's your tree lines. And a lot of times you can find fish in shallower water. So when I'm picking my baits, I classify my baits into two different types. I got my moving baits and I got my bottom baits. And what I mean by that is I have baits I can chuck and wind, obviously. I have baits that I can crawl on the bottom. Simple as that, nothing too fancy. Obviously, what I like to do is I like to basically pick 4 different things that'll help me the quickest amount of time figuring out what I'm going to be doing that night. That's going to be the swim bait, the crankbait, the jig, and the worm. Obviously, I got 2 of my favorite moving baits, 2 of my favorite bottom baits. I know that with the utmost confidence, out of all this stuff you see on the table, I can pick apart a bite and I can figure out what these fish are doing. So, in going to a lake, obviously, nighttime's almost like going to a lake for the first time. Where do we go? What do we do? I want to see what I can get away with in the quickest amount of time possible. I want to go and cover as much water as I can. Oftentimes in our night tournaments in Southern California, we have till the sun sets to run on plane, and then we have to go idle around the lake, 5 miles an hour, which it takes a long time to get from one end to the other. So it's very important that you actually find some baits that you can cover water effectively in the quickest amount of time. So right off the bat, what I like to do is I want to see what I can get away with. Obviously, on my lakes around here, we have a lot of swim bait fish we have a lot of water conducive to swim bait fishing. We have a lot of tree lines, we have a lot of mud, we have a lot of rock. So what I'm going to do right off the get-go is pick up a swim bait. And a lot of times at the night bite, that dusk bite, I want to see what I can get away with. I want to see if these fish will commit to coming up on the surface to either, like, let's say, MS slammer or even a rat bait, some sort of a wake bait on the surface. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to pick apart my parts of the water column. Simple as that. Top, middle, bottom. I want to figure if they're on the upper half, the middle half, or the bottom half. So when I go down to the lake, one of my favorite swim baits of all time to throw for night fishing is an MS slammer. Obviously, they're very hard to get right now. We have a big order we're waiting on, and definitely keep checking back into the website because we're going to have some baits in there. We wanted to restock heavily on that. That way we can get prepared for this awesome night bite. Being that it's still early, we still have plenty of time. But when I'm fishing my slammers, obviously what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be covering some water. I want to pick apart every ambush point on the bank, knowing this is a floating bait. It's a wake bait meant to be fished up high in the water column. You can crank it down, but it's meant to be fished up high in the water column. So I'm going to pick apart my tree lines. I'm going to pick apart my rocks. I'm going to pick apart whatever shadow line is left before it gets in the dark. Bass have eyes on top of their head. They're looking up. If there's a lot of sun up still, they don't want to be looking straight up at the light, straight up at the sun. So they're going to conceal themselves along shadow edges, whether it be trees, whether it be grass, whatever. So the first thing I'll often pick is an MS slammer. All I'm doing is throwing that thing on your medium, heavy action swim bait stick, which would actually be like a 15 to 40. It's your middle range rod. I'm throwing it on an 8-foot stick, 15 to 40 pound rated. I like to fish my MS slammers on braid, and I will get into more of this stuff in future Periscope episodes, but I'm going to kind of go into it pretty quick. But yeah, so 8-foot stick, 15 to 40. I like 65 pound braid, extremely manageable while you fish, and I'm fishing like a 6:3 to 1 gear ratio reel. Now, it's open to interpretation, round reel, low profile reel. I'll let you guys be the judge. Whatever fishes best in your hand. Lately, I've been fishing more low profile reels, like the Daiwa Lexa 300. Exceptional reel for fishing baits of this size. Bulletproof, doesn't cost a whole lot of money. You're talking like $200. It gets the job done. If you're throwing Calcuttas, you're throwing, Calcutta D's, NACLs, all that kind of stuff, it's all going to work just fine. Be confident with your equipment, and you don't need to throw heavy equipment. Now, obviously, slammer's my favorite, but I will fish rats. I want to fish something that causes some sort of a disturbance on the surface. I want to see what these fish will eat. This right here is a Spro. Very, very well-constructed bait that you don't need to throw on super heavy stout equipment. You can get away with throwing on the same exact rod as you would like an MS slammer. The thing about night fishing is you don't want to have 15 sticks on the deck of your boat. You want to have a few because you can't really manage all those rods on your boat in your float tube on the shoreline. So you want to find rods that'll double up. So the same rod that you'll be able to fish your slammer with, you can fish the rat with. Now, I will fish straight braid with my rats and stuff like that, and I'm going to twitch. I'm going to wake it across the surface. I'm going to do a lot of different stuff to see if those fish are willing to commit to the surface. There's a lot of other baits out there, buzz baits, buzz jets, spiral minnows, a lot of cool baits. But me personally, my confidence is going to be in the MS slammer and some form of a rat. It could be Nazuma, it could be Spro, it could be Morningwood. Whatever you have confidence, that's what you want to go. So let's say I went to that lake and I'm kind of going, oh man, I didn't get a swim bait bite. I'm not going to live or die by that. If they're not going to eat that, I'm putting it down. There were days where I used to live and die with it, but I'm smarter now. If they're not eating it, off the curb it goes. I may pick it up later. So what I'll do is I'll dissect parts of the water column. I'm going to go now more into, let's say, my mid-water column bait. I'm going to pick up a crankbait. I can cover a lot of water in the quickest amount of time, maybe savoring some of those moments I have in the daylight before I can go to a new spot. So obviously, you got two parts of the water column with your crankbait. You got your upper half bait, and you got your deeper bait. What I mean by that is you have your square bills, and you have your deep running crankbaits. So what I'm going to do is, obviously, I want to see where they are in the water column. It makes no sense for me to go from the surface straight to the bottom. I want to stair step. I want to make it easy on myself. So I always start with a square bill crankbait. And now you can throw just about any square bill crankbait as long as you're identifying parts of the water column where these fish are hanging at. So obviously right here, this is a Megabass Z crank. We just got them into Tackle.com. One of my favorite baits that I've been fishing for a long time, but I couldn't really say too much about it. We brought him into the shop, and I'm very, very excited because this bait is a maniac right here. You're talking roughly a half-ounce type bait, but listen. It's got a lot of rattles, makes a lot of noise. Very, very good in those night bites. Being that largemouth, specifically large, well, all bass in general, they do feed heavily by their sight, but they also use their lateral lines on the side to pick up vibration, pick up all that stuff. So you got noise they can hear, vibration of that crankbait digging around. A lot of times those fish can pick up on that. Sometimes you can actually get away with catching quite a bit of fish. We did pretty well in a night tournament this last season, or the season before last, throwing crankbaits, doing really, really good, throwing like speed traps and type stuff like that. So I'm not only limited to Megabass products. Yes, I'm sponsored by the company, but I'm willing to fish whatever it takes to get bit. As far as a square bill goes, you can fish Strike King. Very good baits for the money. Affordable baits with great color selection. If you hop onto the website, you can actually take a look at it. I'm going to fish, the Lure Jensen Speed Trap, one of the best square bill crankbaits of all time. Again, it has loud rattles. Very, very conducive to night fishing. And it's cool because what I can do with this bait is I can cover a lot of water. I can do it fast. I can fish riprap. I can fish points. I can fish tree lines, mud lines, whatever with that bait. It's a crankbait. You're going to get it snagged, but you got to put those baits where the fish are. So when I'm doing this right here, I'm just going to be throwing my crankbaits on something like a 765 CB Glass Dobbins rod. Like I said, I am sponsored by Megabass, but I still fish a lot of different products. The Dobbins crank-in rod is one of my absolute favorite rods. Softer midsection to it. You can lean back and still have a lot of power because it still is a 5 power. You don't want to fish Dobbins. You can fish any rod pretty much from Shimano, Daiwa, iRod, Loomis, whatever fits you as an angler. And I'm looking just for a rod that's going to have some form of a load up. When I fish my square bill crankbaits at night, obviously I know we're under the cloak of darkness. I don't have to finesse these fish anymore. So oftentimes what I do is I fish 40-pound braid, spliced a 15-pound fluorocarbon leader. I find for me, the braid allows me to cast long distances. The fluorocarbon at 15-pound test is highly abrasion resistant, so I can pull it over rocks, I can pull it through trees, I can do all sorts of stuff and not have to always cut and retie my leader. And all I'm doing with that bait right there is I'm fishing it on, like I said, like a 6.3 to 1 gear ratio reel, or even a 7. I don't buy that whole concept of oftentimes fishing low gear ratio reels for crankbaits. It's so much easier to wind into a bite than it is to pick up the speed. I guess I should rephrase that. When you're on a low gear reel, say in the 5.4 to 1 gear ratio, at your perfect speed, you're still cranking pretty darn slow. When you get bit, you have to pick up your speed all crazy just to connect to that fish and pick up line. When you have a 6.3 to 1, 7 to 1, or even 8 to 1, as you're firing that bait out, you slow down on your retrieve, but when you get bit, you still have that speed to bury that hook point without actually swing setting these fish. Keeps those fish pinned a lot. So the square bill is a very, very important bait for me at nighttime because it targets that 3 to 8, 3 to 10 foot part of the water column. Assuming I don't get bit doing that, going like, oh my gosh, I am lost my marbles, I can't get a reaction bite going, I'm going to pick up the deep crank. And this could be elementary to some, and some of you guys might know it, but this is just kind of the tools of the trade for the night bite. But so I'm going to pick up a deep crank. And usually you're going to burn through 2 hours of daylight, hour of daylight. It's getting dark. You're going, oh crap. I'm going to pick up my deep crank and cover a deeper depth just to find out where these fish are actually going to be hanging. So I'm going to pick up baits like the Norman DD22 or even the Megabass Deep 6, one of my absolute favorite night baits, or just baits in general. It gets down the water column deep and it doesn't put a lot of strain on you. So when you're dealing with that darker condition, you got two things to think about. And I really, really think about this a lot, and some people think I'm stupid for it, but I believe fish can see, but I don't think they can see that well. So what I look for is I want something that's going to cast silhouette at night. I want dark colored baits. I'm looking for those black color baits. I'm looking for something with some sort of a color tone difference, whether it be black and red, black and blue, black and yellow. I want something that's going to break up the monotony of just a black bait. If there is a moon, and I know that moon's shining bright, the moon is just like sunshine outside. And we've actually been fishing a lot of this local watering hole around our area lately, fishing the moon bite because it's a full moon right now. And I believe these fish will set up in shadow edges under a full moon the same way they do under the bright sun. So I want to fish a bait under a full moon that's going to have sort of a mirror effect. I want it to show a little bit of color. This right here is a Norman bait that I absolutely love right here. It's a cool bait in the moon. It's just black-blue. Now, in the no moon, I keep it simple. Everything in my arsenal is pretty basic. A black and a red for a no moon works very, very well. Normans, it's hard to knock a Norman bait. They have good knock to them. They get down deep. They're cheap, and you can trash them. When you get it snagged, just tie another one on and go. Now, with the Megabass, it's a little bit more expensive. You got to kind of mind your P's and Q's with it. But it's a very, very good, effective tool. This one actually is a blue sunshine gill right here. It's actually my absolute favorite deep 6 color. But at night, I will stay with the darker colors. I just pulled this thing out just to give you guys a shot, just to see one of my absolute favorite crankbaits. Now, when I'm throwing that deep crank, it's different than I will fish my shallow crank. I don't throw the deep crank on a braid to leader outfit. I throw my deep crank on 15-pound fluorocarbon. Yes, I'm sacrificing depth by going up to 15-pound test. But at nighttime, you're just jaw-jacking fish. You just want to hook these fish, get them in the boat, grind on them, put another one in. You can't afford to play these fish at night. So I'll fish 15-pound fluorocarbon. I'm fishing on, me personally, I'm fishing on a 7-11 crankbait rod. Limber in the tip, a lot of backbone at the bottom end. So going from braid to leader into straight fluorocarbon, obviously I have more give now. I can sit there and wind on these fish and get them in. With the deep crank, I do fish the deep crank on lower gear ratio reels, contrary to my shallow crank. I like my 5/4s because as I'm bombing that deep crank out there and I'm winding down, it's not putting a lot of unnecessary strain on me sitting there fighting that reel at a higher gear ratio. At a lower gear with a deep crank, you're basically combating that load. You're basically able to just wind like nothing. I fish an Abu Garcia Revo winch when I throw the deep crank. And it's pretty basic. Pick parts of your water column, pick your colors, and if you still can't get something going or you only drew a few bites, I'm going to basically go to the bottom. And now what I'm doing with this, bottom for me doesn't always have to be 30, 40, 50 foot of water. Bottom can be right up on the bank fishing the bottom. If you just need to get bit, there's 2 baits at nighttime that you'll absolutely excel in for your bottom baits. That's going to be the football head jig, arky head jig, whatever, the jig, and the big worm. Spot-specific baits, or this is my water covering bait, my jig, and my big worm is my spot-specific bait. So I try to have my fun with this stuff. Can't get bit. My confidence bait is to go straight to a jig. I know I'm going to catch fish on a jig because that's just my bait. I know I'm going to own that. So when I'm fishing my jigs, I'm going to basically pick apart the parts of the water column on the bottom again. I'm going to fire up to the bank. I'm going to use my top, middle, bottom. The bank, 15 foot, 30 foot. Top, middle, bottom. That's going to tell me what depth I need to focus on maybe the rest of the night or for the last few hours of a tournament or pond trip. So as I'm picking my jigs, because I'm fishing generally shallower than I would in the daytime, I'm going to opt for more of that 3/8 ounce size jig or even a 1/4 ounce size jig. I always start with 3/8. That's my confidence bait for fishing shallower water than 30 foot of water. And when I'm picking my jig colors, I'm taking careful consideration of what my moon is like. Dark moon, I don't think it matters. You're either a black and a blue guy, you're a black and a red guy, or you're a straight black guy. What's the common color? It's the black color. It's dark. It casts silhouette. So that's what I'm going to do right there. Me personally, I always start with a black and blue. One thing I want to tell you, though, under the full moon, that moon is shining down into that water, and a lot of lakes on the west coast here, Southern California especially, we're going to have clear water. So we're going to see moonlight sometimes down to 15 foot of water. So I do a little play on words with my jigs a little bit, or play on colors. This is one that I particularly tie that you can actually buy very similar at Tackle.com. I have a different color tone. This is like a black and a blue, but it has purple highlight in it. Very, very cool color because I'm convinced that having some color tone difference, like the crankbait, these fish will either see it visually or feel it. Obviously, they're not going to feel the color, but they're going to see it. So it definitely helps get their attention as they are more built on, bass are more sight-oriented creatures. They feed off of sight. They will feed off of vibration. So I like a little contrast in my colors. Now, because it's night, because they can't see all that good, it's just like us walking into a dark house. We always have to turn a light on, shine our phone, whatever. You want something that's going to cause disturbance in the water to allow these fish to pick up on your jig. So I like to fish trailers that have a lot of flap to them or have appendages hanging off of them to give that disturbance. This is my favorite jig trailer of all time, or since I started fishing, I should say. It's the NetBait Pocket Punch. This is the Toledo Special. What this is, it's a black and a blue flake on the back, fading into green pumpkin on the bottom. Very, very effective night bait for me, because this is something you can fish from the daytime going into night and have the utmost confidence. I got my jig, I can focus on getting bit. Now, the net bait's cool and all, but lately I've been actually experimenting a lot more. As you can see, I haven't even cut my bait off. This is a jig I've been fishing lately. It's obviously the same jig I talked about with a crazy legs trigger craw on the bottom end. Obviously on this crazy legs trigger craw, just like right here, you have a little bit of appendage hanging off as basically the antennas, and the actual claws are cut just a little bit different. This thing has all sorts of flap as I'm pulling it downhill. Now, again, colors for me, I keep it basic. I'm a black and a blue guy at night. Just how it's always been. I don't know why. It's been my confidence. I always match my jig. My jig is there to add color and bulk to my trailer, so my trailer is my attention getter. I think as I'm shaking a black and a blue jig under a moon, let's say, those fish can hone in on that flick. They're going, what's that? Something's not right. Something's different. Something's alive. I think that gets me more bites. At the same time, under no moon, I can fish the same exact trailer because the overall color is black, and I can get away with it. It casts good silhouettes, so I don't have to sit there and stock 15 bags of different colors thinking to myself, hey, I need to have a color for no moon. I need to have a color for the dark of the moon. I need to do this, that, whatever. I keep it extremely simple. I keep it black and blue. That's my confidence. Whether it's Reaction Innovations, their color called Penetration. You got Power Bait, the Jigger Craw, black and blue. You got Toledo Special. Overall color is black and blue for me. When I'm throwing a jig at night, I'm fishing 15-pound test, fluorocarbon. I fish heavy line, up to 20-pound test. We're in the dark. You bomb a bait up in shallow water, odds are you're going to be pulling it out of the bushes a lot. You're going to pull out a rock, you're going to hit a fence line, you're going to hit something, whatever you're doing at night. It's going to happen. I fish heavy line for abrasion resistance. If you don't hear a splash, you're not in the water. As simple as that. So I fish the 15 to 20-pound test. When I do get bit, I can really lean back and crack these fish because I don't know what obstacle is between me and my fish. It could be a tree, it could be a log, it could be a fence post, it could be a cable. So having that security of 15 to 20-pound test fluorocarbon, I use a lot of Seagar and VizX, and we'll go up to a BrazeX. One line I actually plan on fishing this year is a lot more of the Seagar Tatsu. It's expensive, but it's some of the toughest line. We actually sell it here at the shop. You're talking like $40 a spool, but you can leave this stuff on for a long period of time, and it's bulletproof. But so I'm fishing heavier line. With my setups for the jig at night, I fish on the upper end of the spectrum with my rods. I'm fishing my flipping sticks. I'm fishing heavy action rods because I don't have time to play around with fish. Big fish come out at night simply because the fact they're under the cloak of darkness. They feel comfortable. They own that lake because they're the alpha predator. I want to hook one of these big fish, and I don't want to miss a hook set because I ran too soft of a rod. So I'm fishing generally 7'9", 15 to 30-pound test rods, basically light flipping sticks. Allows me the power to basically, like I said, jaw jack these fish. I can hook them, grind them, and I'm good. As far as reels go, I fish Abu Garcia Revo MGXs. I'm talking 7.9 to 1 gear ratio. This guy right here. Abu Garcia Revo MGX 7.9. I like a high gear ratio reel because when I get bit, I want to wind down fast and stuff the hook. I don't give them any time. I don't sit there and go thump, thump, thump. Let me drop this rod tip, allow the fish to take off. That's not how I work. When they bite that jig, sometimes they're claw grabbers, but half the time they're biting that jig, they're sucking it in, spitting it out. So the thump, thump. So in the back of your head, kind of gauge your fish, figure out what they're doing. If you feel that thump, thump, wind down, set the hook, grind on them, get those fish in. So there you have it with the jig. Now, a lot of times I'm using that jig for
Somebody was asking what size that they missed it. Sorry.
I blab a little too much.
But what size jig?
Okay, I'm throwing a lot of 3/8 ounce jigs at night. But say I'm fishing the bank out to 30 foot of water or 20 foot of water, whatever. I'm throwing 3/8 ounce. On the rare occasion where nighttime acts as daytime and you have to seek out offshore spots, rock piles, points, ridges, all that kind of stuff, ledges offshore, I will sometimes opt to go half ounce. it gets down quick. I can feel the bottom better at deeper depths. We get a lot of wind at night out here a lot of times, so you need all the help you can get. Fishing a lighter jig down deep kind of sucks, so I'm going to fish like a ½ ounce. But ideally, my starting jig is always 3/8 ounce, something with a good bite to it. So I've isolated my fish with the jig. I maybe figured out they're holding in 20 foot of water. They're holding an isolated rock. They're doing this kind of stuff. But the jig, something's telling me the jig isn't right for the situation. I'm getting the bites, but it's few and far between, or I'm getting short bit, or whatever. That's what I'm going to think to myself, is like, maybe I'm fishing too fast. Maybe I do need to slow down. Maybe I need to actually methodically pick apart these isolated rock piles or trees or whatever. That's when I'm going to reach for the big worm rod in my arsenal. And big worms are open to interpretation wherever you go. I mean, if you're fishing on the East Coast, Massachusetts, you're probably not throwing 12 to 16-inch plastic worms. I don't see why you wouldn't, but the odds are the fish don't reach that trophy size we have in SoCal. So obviously you want to tailor your size of bait to the fish you're fishing a lot of times. You don't need to be throwing that freaking 16-inch type stuff. So out here on the West Coast, big worms to me generally start at 8 inches, ideally 9s, 10s, 12s, and then going into the mega worms like your 16s, 24s, whatever. So say I've isolated these fish out to offshore rock piles. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick apart the big worm. Again, like my jigs, I'm gonna pay attention to what I have to work with the moon. Now, if it's dark at the moon, or if it's full moon, if there's any light penetration, that's my ultimate goal. So worms that I have confidence, I fish a lot of bass trout. I fish a lot of Uptons. I've fished Uptons for a lot of years because he's been a good buddy of ours. And I've isolated 2 colors that work for me in the Upton's 9-inch, as you can see right here. And that's going to be Night Stalker and Black Grape. And those of you that know that if I had one worm to throw for the rest of my life, it would be Black Grape. I preach this on everybody that walks in the tackle store. And they look at this purple worm and they go like, what the hell is that? They don't know what it is. So, obviously, like I said with the jigs, in the dark of the moon, I don't believe fish know the difference between purple and black. I think what they're feeling is this worm creeping across rocks. They're feeling, the clack of that weight hitting the rocks, all that kind of stuff. So, under the dark of the moon, I'm going to opt for a black color. And what Upton did with Night Stalker is we know we have guys that like black and blue. Swear by it. There's other guys that like black and red. So Knucklehead Upton over here, he put red and blue flake in one worm. So if you're going to tell me black and blue is the best and black and red doesn't work, but you catch them on this, you should reevaluate your color choices. This is good. Under the full moon, I know light's going to penetrate in that water column. I opt for black grape right here. It's basically a purple worm with blue highlights. So as you're shaking that worm, when that moon's shining down on it, every undulation of that worm, the highlight's getting picked up, so it's flashing it, in my opinion. These fish can track that. If they're sitting on the edge of that rock pile, like as we know, big fish are like outside edge structure spots, bordering deep water axis. You sit up on a point, fire out to deep water, and you're shaking that worm uphill nice and methodical. Those fish can not only pick up the vibration in my mind, but they can whatever light penetration is hitting that spot, they can pick up on the actual bait's action. So it's a double effect. Double effect, I would say. Very confident in that bait. Another bait that everybody always talks about is the first thing out of people's mouths, 10-inch power worm. Without a doubt, this is probably one of the best night worms.
Before you go on to that, they want to know how you rig the big worm.
Okay. When I'm fishing big worms at night, I Texas rig them. But I'm not ashamed to drop shot them. I would say probably 4 or 5 years ago, I played around with the drop shot out there at night with the 9-inch worm. And I was fishing Black Grape. I was fishing with Dan, and we were kind of helping with a national bass event, and we were actually fishing these docks at the bottom, just waiting for boats to come check in. I was just casting off the dock, and I'm like, what the hell, I'm going to drop shot. I started cracking them. Sometimes up high in the water column with the drop shot is extremely effective, but 90% of the time, you won't catch me without a Texas rig in my hand. And what I do different about my Texas rigs when I rig the big worm at night is I bobber stop them. So what I'm going to do is, as we've said in previous videos, I showed the little bobber stops, the little rubber pieces that you slide on your line, prevent your weight from sliding all over the place, like we use for flipping. I double bobber stop. I put 2 bobber stops up the line, sometimes 1, mostly 1. I'll slide them up the line, insert my weight, tie my hook on, rig it Texas style. What I'm going to do then is slide my bobber stopper within probably to allow a little bit like 1/4 inch of slop between my weight and the worm, and so it kind of moves around. I find as I'm throwing out, there's nothing more frustrating than fishing at night. Throw across a set of trees or whatever, allow that bait to hit the bottom, you're shaking it. You just feel that weight on your line. You're thinking to yourself, man, does the fish have it? You swing set, you miss it, you snag a tree. What'll happen if you don't bobber stop your plastics a lot of times at night, being that you can't see and you don't know your water, is your bait's going to fall down. Your weight's going to be on one side of a tree, your worm's going to be on the other, so you're just playing teeter-totter with these things. And a lot of times I find that that's just eating up too much of your time, it's ruining your plastics, and you're snagging too much. So you can't afford to blow out spots at night. So what I like to do is bobber stop it. When I throw it out there, my weight's going to fall, dragging the worm with it. I know exactly if I'm on a tree. I'll just lift it up over the tree, let it fall back down. So Texas rigging is very, very essential for me for nighttime fishing with the bobber stopper. And as far as weight size goes, when I'm fishing the Texas rig, I'm keeping it basic with it. If I'm fishing shallow water, I may go down to a 1/16. I like to feel the bottom because I want to maintain bottom contact with this stuff. I don't want to sit here and be floating in no man's land, shaking this worm around, having it 5 feet off the bottom, thinking I'm on the bottom. So my usual starting point is 1/4 or 3/8 ounce. I grew up fishing 1/16, 1/8, 3/16, all that stuff, but you're fishing night, you're fishing faster than normal a lot of times. So 1/4, 3/8 is my starting point. And if it's windy, I may go up from there. Generally, I'm throwing 4/0 hooks, anywhere from 2/0 to 4/0 hooks, depending upon worm size. Like when you get into, like I was saying, with one of the best night baits of all time, the 10-inch Berkeley Power Worm, this guy right here has a meaty profile to it. Like I said before, being that you're under the cloak of darkness, fish cannot tell. They can't make out the subtleties they can during the day. So you can get away with fishing a big hook, but for me, I feel more confident keeping it proportioned to the bait I'm fishing. Just like saltwater, match your hook size to the bait you're fishing. You don't want to throw a big hook with a small bait. You don't want to throw a small hook with a big bait. So generally, if I'm in that between 2/0 to 5/0, 2/0 to 4/0 category, I'm great. And now when I'm fishing the ribbon tail as opposed to the straight tail, this is more my methodical bait. I've already picked my spot, and I'm shaking that worm in place. With this bait, this is a ribbon tail bait. I can cover water much like the jig with it. Give myself like a 1/4 ounce weight, fire it out there, throw it on the shoreline, drag it in the water, and I can lift and on a tight line allow that bait to drop. That tail is moving all over the place, creating vibration. So I'm able to cover a lot of water doing that. At the same time, I can sit there, stop it, fish it methodical. There's times where you could fish these things without any weight whatsoever. Very effective swimming across the surface. Good if they're on this topwater bite, like my swim baits. So I usually I stay in a small zone when I fish nighttime, simply because it's just, you can get yourself in a rut. There's too many baits to fish, so short a time, so fish your confidence. When I'm fishing my big worms at night, just like the jig, I don't finesse my fish. I'm going to throw heavy line. On my big worms, I'm throwing 15-pound fluorocarbon. In daytime, I'd be throwing those things on 8, 10, 12. Nighttime, they cannot see. I want fluorocarbon simply because or over mono or braid, because fluorocarbon sinks. I'm casting that bait out there. I'm pulling the line off, allowing that bait to sink. It's falling down there. As I start working my bait, because I'm generally in shallower water as fish started to move up, I'm actually in direct contact with my bait in no time. It's not like fishing 40 foot of water where you fire it out there, you're pulling line off, the current's dragging your line, bowing your line, getting all crazy. You're tight quartered. So I want my line to be in direct contact. When I wind down, I'm into my bite. Because a lot of times, especially with the ribbon tail worms, on the initial fall, even with the jig, on the initial fall, you're going to get bit. And if you're not in total control, you're going to miss these fish. Simple as that. You're going to sit there and go, oh, I'm bit, hold on to that rod, wait for them to do something. They're going to drop it. They don't have to. They're not always going to get hooked. They're going to drop it. So 15-pound test fluorocarbon. As far as rods go, I'm going to upsize my rods as well. Because this is basically donkey hunting at night, fishing big ones, I'm going to fish a heavier than standard rod. I'm going to be into the 5-power class, 5 powers rods, which is basically medium heavy to heavy action. Now, you can fish your Dobbins, you can fish Shimano, like I said, you can fish Daiwa, whatever's the best for you. I personally love fishing flipping sticks, especially when I'm tight quartered and pulling on big fish. It offers me power, but I can feel it. A good flipping rod still has a little bit of tip. It's not just a meat stick. I want to be able to feel that bait and shake it around and actually feel what my bait's doing. Too stiff of a rod, you're going to be dragging your bait too far without feeling the sensitivity of that rod, feeling the rocks. Going into reels with the big worm, I'm going to fish the highest gear ratio I can because I'm going to throw that bait out there, and as I work that thing back, if I get bit, I want to reel down my slack fast enough so I can reel it to set the hook. And by the time you reel your slack down, odds are these fish already have your bait. There's going to be times where you're going to drop your rod tip, give them a little bit, then set. But for me, in my experience, a lot of the night fish, their guards let down. That's your time to really come across some big, hungry fish. They're going to knock slack into the line a lot of times. Now, obviously, like I said, I went through line, I went through rod, I went through reel. Now, when you're picking whatever bait right here you choose, I highly recommend for you to give yourself a process of elimination. You just don't go fishing with a whole boat full of stuff and you try everything for 5 minutes and then tie in a new bait. Have a plan. Identify the part of the water column these fish are feeding on, figuring out what forage they're on, and then put that bait in front of them at that zone. It's simple as that. So being that we don't have the ability to really cover a lot of ground at night, I'm going to break it down like I said in the beginning. I have my top part of the water column. I have my wake baits, my surface baits. It could be rats. It could be slammers. It could be, buzz jets. Whatever's on the surface causing disturbance. Then I'm going to pick my mid-water column baits, my crankbaits that I outlined. I want to be able to find what's in that zone, as you can see right here, what's in that zone from 3 to 15 foot of water, 3 to 20 foot of water. That's going to help me identify where these fish are. And if I'm not getting bit on this stuff, I throw it in trash. I think to myself, okay, take that rod off the deck, put it back in the rod locker, or cut that bait off, tie something else on. I'm going to go to my worm and a jig because I know without a doubt I'm going to get them on this stuff. I know I'm going to draw bites on it. And for me, between these two, if there's a jig bite, I'm going to own that jig bite, and I'm going to crack these fish hard. And that's my confidence bait for night. Worm is usually my follow-up bait. That's when I know after I fish the jig, if I still can't get on a jig, I'm like, oh man, this is a lost cause. I might as well go home, either drive home from the pond or park it or whatever. I'm going to pick up the worm and get back to daytime fishing. I'm going to go out there, get on my spots. I know fish should be on structure, creatures of habit, methodically fish them. So by having a process of elimination, you're able to eliminate, dead water from active water and eliminate bad patterns from good patterns. Very, very effective. So I just want to say thanks for joining in on this Periscope. Hopefully, I'm going to give it open to some questions right now. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to answer anything you guys offer. If you want to know how to fish some of this stuff, leave it up to you guys.
There was one question earlier about, which is kind of open-ended, but about treble hooks to replace on your crankbaits.
I've experimented with that, and I'll be straight with you. As technical as I am as an angler, and I break down stuff to straight stupidity, I fish a lot of stock hooks. But what I have found for nighttime conditions, because I am pulling harder, my absolute favorite hook for swapping out, like on my speed traps and stuff, is the Gamakatsu short shank treble hook. It's a heavy gauge hook, shorter shank, so I can upsize my hook size from, let's say, a size 4 to a size 2 or a size 2 to a size 1. I can upsize one size but retain the same height so I don't have the hooks marry on me. I find the Gamakatsu short shank treble hook is one of the best for heavier cover applications pulling harder on big fish.
And what about, which I don't think is big in our area, about fluorescent line and black lights?
A lot of guys talked about that. I grew up reading this kind of stuff, and I'll be straight honest with you. I'm a West Coast guy, born and raised in Southern California in this area, and I saw that going night fishing with fluorescent line. I was like, what in the hell is that? I don't get it, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense to me. Obviously, for those of you that have read that question, probably like, what the heck's he talking about? What it is you have certain types of fishing line where you can lay this black light over the side of your boat, and the fluorescent light, the black light picks up on your line, giving you better visual reference as to what your line's doing. So say you're fishing a big one, taking it across the bottom, you drop your rod tip, feel a bite, you can sit there and watch your line take off. There's benefits to it, but being that our fish are so pressured here, we got clear water, I think that can work as a negative as the fish maybe will see that light. I don't know. not something I would do. It's kind of an interesting concept.
And I think I covered it, except for somebody did ask about shell crackers, if they're a good night bait.
Oh, absolutely. The funny thing about me is I like to have fun in the tackle shop, and sometimes I'll be like, no, I don't like that bait. I like that bait. It's good. Shell cracker is a killer bait. It's just, they're hard to come by. It's a good, noisy bait. And like I said, all the stuff I have here isn't the only stuff I'll throw at night, but this is confidence for me. So a wake bait could be a 316, baby wake. It could be, your slammers. It can be, a Roman-made bait. It could be the throb. It could be anything. And I highly encourage you guys to get on Tackle.com, go to that stuff and look at it. And if you don't see it online, give me a call at the shop. Don't simply go, okay, well, they don't have it. I'm not going to call them. We're not going to go back. Give me a shout at the shop, and I'll walk you through it. I mean, a lot of people put too much thought into their baits, and night fishing is when we can make mistakes. It's fun. The one thing I want to definitely, obviously, say is hop onto our site, take a look at it. We're doing some upgrades on it right now. We're making sure everything is all legit, getting a lot of new baits in. And over at Last Chance Performance Marine, we talked about a little bit before, we've taken on Skeeter bass boats. So be ready to see a lot of Skeeter from the bay boats to the standard bass series. Be ready to see that stuff. And give it a little bit of time, we'll get it all dialed, but we'll do some posts on the internet talking about it and all that kind of good stuff. But it's pretty much, this is a fun time of year. Enjoy yourself. If you're not having fun bass fishing, you're in the wrong sport. I love it. But if that's all the questions, I guess we'll say see ya for tonight. As always, we thank you for your business. Look forward to helping you guys become better anglers.